My name is Henry Moore, and I'm a man who has lived more than 50 years on this earth. A simple man, a working man, a father who tried his best with what little he had. For most of my life, I believed that love and effort were enough to keep a family whole. I believed a child will always remember the hands that fed them and the steps that guided them. I held that belief close to my heart. I never imagined that one day my own daughter would stand before a crowded hall and tell the world that her father was gone. Not lost, not missing, not taken by sickness, but gone by her own choice. I can still feel the weight of that moment the same way a person feels the cold before a storm. I walked into that hall with slow, steady steps, my back a little stiff from age, my heart calm because I thought I was entering a celebration in her life, some proud moment that she wanted her old man to see. I pushed open the tall wooden door, and the bright lights from inside hit my eyes. At first I saw nothing unusual, only a shimmer of decorations, rows of seats, people standing with drinks in their hands. But then I saw it, my own face staring back at me from a giant portrait propped up at the front. It felt unreal. My picture looked peaceful, too peaceful, like I was resting, like I was no longer part of this world. Under it were words written in large bold letters that said farewell to a loving father. My heart thudded hard. The sound of people gasping filled the room as they turned toward me one by one. A friend from my younger days dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent hall. Chairs scraped against polished wood as people stood up. Some touched their own faces, as if checking if they were awake or dreaming. Others whispered to each other with wide eyes as they stared at me. But the one sight that hit me hardest was my daughter, Lauren. She stood at the far end of the hall near my portrait wearing a long dark dress, her shoulders stiff, her eyes locked on me as if she had seen a spirit rise from the ground. Her mouth hung open. No sound came out, not even a breath. It was the look a person gives when their lie bursts like a balloon in their hand. Sharp, sudden, impossible to hide. I took a few slow steps inside. Each step was heavy. The hall felt thick with shock and disbelief. It was as if the air itself froze around me. People moved aside as I walked. They did not touch me. They did not speak. They simply parted like a path forming for a man who should not exist. You might wonder how a daughter reaches a point where she tells the world her father has passed when he is very much alive. I wondered the same thing in that moment. I could not make sense of it. I could not understand how any child could erase their parent with a single lie. A lie spoken with confidence. A lie dressed in elegant clothes and polished words. A lie bold enough to gather a crowd for a farewell ceremony. But that day was not the beginning. It was only the day the truth stepped out from behind the curtain. The real story started years before in quiet places, in the small cracks of our relationship, in the distance that grew between us until it became a wide river I did not see forming. As I stood in that hall looking at my own portrait, I felt something break inside me, not loud, not dramatic, but slow and painful, like an old rope that finally snaps after years of strain, and still I kept walking. I did not turn around, I did not run. I stepped even closer to the front where she stood frozen. I met her eyes, she met mine, and the silence between us felt heavier than any words could ever be. Let me take you back to where it all started, before the lies, before the shame, before my own daughter buried me in a story she created. Let me tell you how father ended up at his own farewell, and how that moment did not break me. It awakened something inside me, a quiet strength I never knew I had. A strength that would lead to a truth no one in that room was ready to face, not even me. I was 58 when this chapter of my life began to unfold. A man with tired hands and a back that carried the weight of many long years of hard labor. I had retired from a lifetime of building work. It was not glamorous. It did not come with applause or shiny medals, but it was honest. It was steady. It was the kind of work that shaped a person from the inside out. For more than 3 decades, I woke before the sun touched the sky. I drank my morning tea, while the world outside still slept. Then I stepped into the cold air of dawn and began each day with sore muscles and quiet determination. I returned home when the sky was dark and the houses around me glowed with warm lights in their windows. Most of my adult life was spent raising my daughter Lauren. Her mother passed when she was young, and the quiet in the house grew sharp after that. Those were the years when I learned how to braid hair, how to pack school lunches, how to sit on the edge of a small bed and wait for a child to fall asleep. I cooked her favorite meals. I helped her with school projects even when my own eyes burned from exhaustion. I drove her to school before rushing straight to work. I returned home late. I washed dishes, I folded clothes, I worked extra shifts so she could have more than I had. I made sure her room was warm, safe, comfortable. She had posters on her wall, bright ones. Her favorite was a picture of a sunset over a mountain. She said it made her feel brave. Back then I believed nothing could break the bond between us. It felt strong, strong like a bridge built with the best steel. I would come home tired and dusty from the job, my boots leaving trails of dry mud. She would run toward me with the biggest smile a child could have. She would throw her arms around my waist and say, "Daddy, you are my hero." Those simple words carried me through the hardest days, through bitter winters when the cold cut through every layer of clothing, through summers when the heat felt like it could melt a person, through everything. Her voice was the reward at the end of each day. Children grow, their worlds expand, their dreams shift, and sometimes a parent does not notice the early signs of distance until it is too late. Lauren grew older and entered that stage where she wanted things I could not easily provide. All the new gadgets her friends showed off, trips they bragged about, clothes that had fancy labels, college plans that cost more than the savings I had carefully built up over the years. I told her I would try. I always tried. A father does not stop trying, even when the world keeps telling him that trying is not enough. After college, everything changed in a way I was not ready for. She moved to the city, a place filled with bright lights and people who lived fast, people who liked polished looks and expensive cars, people who talked about success as if it was a fashion trend. Her new circle lived a life far bigger than anything I ever knew. Lavish parties, rooftop dinners, weekends in high-end resorts. Every time I called, she sounded busy. Every time I asked to visit, she said another time. When she did stop, she carried a tone that cut deeper than any harsh word. She spoke to me like I was part of a life she wanted to escape. Like my old house with its squeaky floor and simple curtains was something she wanted to forget. I was the father who fixed things with worn hands and old tools, not the kind of father her new world admired. Still, I loved her. A father never stops loving, even when the love feels one-sided, even when the heart starts to ache from the distance. I told myself she was just trying to find her path. I reminded myself that young people get lost sometimes in shiny worlds that look safer than they truly are. I convinced myself that I should give her time, that she would remember her roots, that she would remember me. But I did not see the danger growing inside those spaces between us. I did not see how easily she let her new friends shape her, how their hunger for money and status fed something unhealthy in her, something that made her look at me not with love, but with embarrassment. I did not realize that she had begun to see me not as her father, but as a limitation, a reminder of where she came from, a reminder she wanted to erase. The truth slowly built itself in the shadows without my knowledge. The truth was not loud at first, it was quiet, it waited, and then one day it revealed itself in a way that stung like a fresh wound. She came to my house one evening wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her hair perfectly styled, her voice sharp and impatient. She told me she needed money, not a little, a large amount. She called it an investment. She said it was something important, something big, something that would take her life to the next level. She said all her friends had put money in and she needed to join them. She said this was her chance to be someone important. Her eyes shined with a hunger I did not recognize. I told her I could not give her that kind of money. I told her I had bills to pay. I told her I had only enough for myself. I told her I wished I could help, but I simply could not. My voice shook a little because I saw disappointment form on her face, but that disappointment quickly twisted into something colder. She looked at me as if I had failed her, as if I had betrayed her by not handing over everything I had. She did not hug me before she left. She did not say goodbye. She just walked out the door with cold shoulders and stiff steps. At the time I thought it was just anger, that she would calm down, that she would understand. But I later learned that day was the true beginning of the end. The moment she decided I no longer fit the story she wanted to tell the world. The moment she began crafting a version of her life where I did not exist. The moment the first real crack appeared in the foundation we built together. That small moment was the seed. And she watered it with pride and shame until it grew into something dark, something powerful, something strong enough to swallow all the good memories we once shared. And I did not see any of it coming. not until it was far too late. The months that followed felt like watching a slow sunset, beautiful at first, then dim, then gone before you realize darkness has settled around you. Lauren drifted away from me in a way I could feel but couldn't stop. It was not loud or dramatic. It wasn't a fight or a slammed door. It was quieter than that, colder than that. A slow fade, like she was turning the dimmer switch on our relationship little by little until one day, the light was barely there at all. In the beginning, I told myself it was life. She was young, busy, chasing dreams. People her age fill their days with noise and movement. They don't mean to forget, they just get swept up in whatever world they are trying to build. But even telling myself that didn't soften the sting every time I dialed her number, and she picked up with a tone that told me she had one foot already pointed somewhere else. The warm girl who once giggled while sitting on my shoulders had become someone who answered the phone like she was doing me a favor. There was a new sharpness in her voice, a clipped edge that hadn't been there before. She would sigh before speaking, as though even hearing my voice required effort she didn't want to give. Whenever I asked how she was, she'd reply with quick surface answers, fine, busy, things are moving, nothing more. And if I gently asked about her life, about her plans, about anything beyond the shallow level, she would say she didn't have time to talk long. Those calls felt like holding onto a rope that was being slowly pulled away from me 1 inch at a time. The worst part wasn't her words. It was what happened when she introduced me to others. I will never forget the day I visited her in the city and she met me outside a cafe. 2 of her friends were with her, dressed sharp, laughing at something on a phone. She waved at them, then at me, and said, "This is Henry. Henry, not Dad, not my father, not even my old man. Henry," like I was a landlord or some distant acquaintance who once fixed a leaky faucet. I remember standing there with my hands in my pockets trying to hide how much it stung. I kept a polite smile on my face, because fathers learn early in life that their pain should not become their child's burden. But inside, something in me tightened, like a small rope being pulled too hard. Her friends nodded at me, uninterested, then turned back to her as if I had served my purpose. She didn't look embarrassed or guilty. It was as if she truly believed I fit nowhere in her world anymore. But I still loved her. Love doesn't stop when respect begins to fade. A parent's love stretches, bends, and absorbs the impact of disappointment, the way old wood absorbs storms, quietly, without breaking, even when the cracks deepen. I didn't know then that she wasn't just distancing herself from me, she was reconstructing her life's narrative. She was telling people a story where I no longer existed, where I had died, not tragically, not mournfully, just gone, a detail erased, because it didn't match the shiny image she wanted to present. While I washed dishes in my small kitchen, while I folded laundry, while I walked the old dog down the street, my daughter was attending dinners, brunches, parties, telling new people that her father had passed away. It was easier that way, I would later understand. Easier to pretend she had risen from some tragic childhood, rather than admit she had a father who couldn't hand her a luxury lifestyle. Shock of that truth didn't hit me all at once. It came in pieces, like a puzzle someone else was assembling behind my back. The first clue, a strange message from someone I barely knew offering condolences. I thought they must have mistaken me for someone else. Then strangers stopped by my old work site asking about the man who passed. I laughed it off at the time, shaking my head, saying, "Well, here I am, still breathing." But something inside me whispered that the truth wasn't far behind. Then came the phone call, the one that should have warned me outright but somehow didn't. Lauren invited me to an event she called a major celebration. Her tone was flat, almost detached, like she was reading off a list. She didn't ask how I'd been. She didn't ask if I needed directions. Nothing. Just the time, the place, and a quick goodbye before she hung up. I should have known. I should have felt the tremor of something deeply wrong. But when you love someone, you learn to overlook earthquakes, as long as they come from familiar ground. I ironed my shirt that night, put on the jacket she bought me years ago, the one she used to brag about when she was proud of me. I drove to the venue and rehearsed a smile in my mind, one that told her I was happy for her, whatever this celebration was about. I didn't know she had planned a world where I didn't exist. I didn't know she had prepared a room believing I would never walk into it. I didn't know I was heading toward the moment that would shatter everything and expose just how far a daughter had drifted from her father. But I went anyway, because a father shows up, even when he feels the cold echo of something breaking long before he understands what it really is. I remember the weight of that hall door as my hand pressed against it. It felt heavier than it should have, like it already knew what waited behind it, like it was trying to warn me to turn around before I stepped into something that would change the shape of my life forever. I pushed it open slowly, expecting to hear music or laughter, or the busy hum of guests mingling the way they do at celebrations. I imagined my daughter standing proudly at the center of it all, glowing with whatever milestone she was finally sharing with me. At the moment the door creaked open, everything inside me stopped. Not slowed, not stumbled, stopped. The hall was silent, too silent, unnaturally so, like everyone inside had been speaking only seconds earlier, but every single voice had been yanked out of the air at the exact instant I appeared. My eyes traveled from table to table, from the dim golden lights above to the rows of chairs lined up neatly like something out of a ceremony. But none of that mattered, because my gaze froze on the front of the room where I saw something I will never forget for as long as I live. A portrait. Not just any portrait, my portrait. A giant printed photograph of my face lifted high on an easel, my features sharpened, my expression calm, the same picture I once used for a work ID badge years ago. And beneath that familiar face, in bold, sweeping letters, were the words, "In loving memory of Henry Moore." I didn't hear anyone breathe. I didn't hear the soft hum of the air vents, or the clinking of glasses, or the rustle of dresses. I felt nothing but the pounding of my heart, each beat like a hammer against the inside of my ribs. For a moment I didn't know if I was standing or floating. Everything felt distant, surreal, like a bad dream wearing the mask of reality. Then the whispers started, soft at first, like little threads of disbelief drifting in the air. "Is that? How is he?" But Lauren said, "That can't be real." Someone gasped, someone else whispered a prayer. An elderly friend of mine who hadn't seen me in years placed a trembling hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with the kind of fear people have when they think they are looking at a ghost. A man holding a glass dropped it, and the sound shattered across the floor, the pieces spreading like the fragments of the life I thought I still had with my daughter. I stepped inside because my legs moved without asking me. Each footstep echoed in that large polished hall, and the sound felt too loud, too sharp, like each step was announcing my existence to people who had already buried me in their minds. And then I saw her. My daughter. My Lauren. She stood near the stage in a long dress, surrounded by flowers arranged in solemn white and soft gold, the kind people use for funerals, not birthdays or promotions or celebrations of life. Her back was straight, her posture rigid, and her face looked like marble cracking from the inside. Her eyes widened, her mouth twitched, her breathing stuttered as if she had just seen something impossible, something unimaginable, something she hoped would never walk through that door. Her expression wasn't joy, it wasn't relief, it wasn't even confusion. It was fear. Fear of being caught. Fear of being exposed. Fear that the lie she had lived inside was collapsing in front of a room full of witnesses. When our eyes met, something inside me felt like it unstitched itself from my soul. I had seen my daughter angry, tired, frustrated, and even distant, but I had never seen her look at me like a stranger who had interrupted a carefully crafted performance. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words dissolved in my throat. My lips trembled, my chest tightened. All I managed was a soft exhale, and even that felt too loud in the heavy quiet of that hall. A man I vaguely recognized, someone who once worked with me years ago, approached with shaking hands. He stared at me like the ground beneath him no longer felt real. Henry," he whispered. "I thought you were gone, we all did." He looked from me to the portrait, back to me, then to Lauren, as if he was waiting for someone to tell him that he wasn't losing his mind. And in that moment, the truth hit me, not like a soft realization, but like a blunt force to the chest. She told them I was dead. She built an entire event around my death. She didn't warn me. She didn't tell anyone the truth. She didn't even think I might show up. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I turned my eyes slowly back toward Lauren, and she stared at me with a stiffness I couldn't read at first. Shock, yes, but something colder under it. Her jaw tightened, her hands clasped together in front of her, as if she was holding onto her own story with the last bit of strength she had left. And for the first time in all the years I had known her, through scraped knees, school plays, long talks, quiet dinners, holidays spent together, I saw something in her eyes that had never been there before. A stranger. Not my daughter. A stranger wearing her face. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to even begin to process what she had done. All I knew was that this was no accident, no slip of the tongue, no exaggeration blown out of proportion. This was betrayal. Deep, cold, calculated. And I was standing in the middle of a room full of people mourning me while I was still breathing. The moment I stepped deeper into that hall, the air felt different, heavier, almost sticky with tension, as if every breath I took pressed against a wall of disbelief around me. People who once knew me leaned back in their chairs, as though I carried something strange with me, something unnatural. Their eyes followed me in stiff silence, moving with me like shadows that refused to detach. It was a strange thing to feel like a ghost in a room where you were very much alive. Not a single voice rose loud enough to break the icy quiet. Every whisper felt like a thread tightening around my throat. I could hear them even if I could not understand each word. Some murmured about confusion, others about betrayal, and a few whispered with irritation, as if they had taken a day off to mourn a man who apparently had the nerve to still be walking around. I took another step, and it felt like the floor grew colder beneath my shoes, almost pushing back against me like the entire building itself wished I would turn around and leave. Lauren remained frozen near the front, her face drained of color. She had always been good at wearing a polished smile in public, but at that moment her expression cracked wide open. I had never seen such a look on her, not even during her teenage arguments or her college stress. This was something else entirely. She looked like someone whose world had just shattered in front of an audience she desperately needed to impress. Slowly she finally began walking toward me, each step stiff and cautious, like she was approaching something unpredictable. When she stopped a few feet away, she did not say anything. She did not rush to hug me or explain or even offer a simple hello. Instead, she just stared at me with wide, trembling eyes, as if trying to convince herself that I was real and not some strange vision sent to ruin her perfect story. I felt my throat tighten with a mix of anger and heartbreak as I asked the only word that I could form at that moment. Why? That simple sound felt heavy between us, like a stone falling into water. She parted her lips as if to answer, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted around the room, and I saw emotions flashing through them so fast it was hard to pin down which one she felt the most. Shame flickered there first, then guilt, and then something deeper, something colder. Fear. A fear not of losing me, but of losing this new shiny version of herself she had created, the one that made her look strong and tragic and brave to the people she wanted to impress. Before she said anything, a man stepped forward from behind her. He looked polished, well-dressed, the type of person who had learned how to make his voice sound calm even when his eyes were filled with confusion. He told me he was her business partner. He spoke gently, like he was addressing someone fragile. He explained that the gathering was meant to honor my memory. He said the words with such sincerity that it almost made the lie sound tender. According to him, Lauren had shared how I had passed peacefully. She had spoken of me with grief, with sorrow, with heartbreak. She had described in detail how she had held on to her strength despite losing the only parent she had left. My stomach twisted so hard it felt like my insides folded in on themselves. To think that she stood in this very room on a stage, surrounded by flowers and photographs describing my life as if it belonged to someone gone. All while I was sitting in my small house drinking tea, petting the old cat that visits from the neighbor, and watching reruns of shows I had seen a dozen times. I looked at her again, not the room, not her partner, not the people who were staring like I had broken some sacred ritual, just her, my daughter, my only child. And the weight of everything hit me at once, heavy and sickening. I felt the kind of disappointment that sinks deep into the bones, a quiet ache that feels almost too big to carry. My first instinct was to walk right out of there without another word, but another part of me, the part that had raised her through scraped knees and school plays and heartbreaks, needed answers. Real answers. Answers that did not come wrapped in excuses or polished sentences meant for her fancy friends. I told her to meet me outside. My voice came out low, calmer than I expected, but there was something in my tone that left no room for argument. She nodded, slow and stiff, still silent. The room remained tight with tension as I walked toward the exit. People moved aside like tall grass parting in a field. Not a single hand reached out to touch me. Not one person offered a faint smile or a nod. They simply watched as the man they had believed was gone walked out into the living air again. The moment I stepped outside, the sunlight hit my face, and the warmth felt almost rude after everything that had just happened. The air smelled different too, fresher, but colder in a strange way, like the world outside did not know yet that something inside me had cracked wide open. I stood there waiting, feeling the weight of the hall behind me, as if 100 eyes were still staring through the walls. When Lauren finally walked out, she kept her head down, her hands shaking slightly at her sides. And that was the moment when the first threads of truth began to unravel, not in a neat confession, not in a dramatic outburst, but in a quiet, strained voice from a daughter who had spent too long living in a lie that she hoped would never catch up to her. That sunny sidewalk outside the hall became the place where everything she had hidden for years finally began to spill into the open, one piece at a time, whether she wanted it to or not. Lauren stood a short distance from me, with her shoulders drawn tight and her hands pressed together, as if she was afraid her whole world might slip through her fingers. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, and for a long moment the only sound between us was the soft breeze brushing along the sidewalk. I felt a mix of confusion and hurt twisting inside me, and I asked her again in a steady voice why she told people I was gone and what could ever push her to erase me from her life, while I was still breathing in the same city as her. She lifted her head slowly, and her eyes held a shine that showed she had been holding back tears for far longer than she would ever admit. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked the way a thin piece of glass trembles before it breaks. She said she had joined a business circle in the city, a group filled with people who valued old money, polished families, and high status. She said she felt small every time she stepped into their meetings because she knew she did not come from the kind of world they admired. They made jokes about simple folks and working hands and homes that did not glitter with wealth. She said she hated how those jokes made her feel like she was shrinking. She wanted to be respected, and she wanted them to see her as someone who belonged in their perfect circles. She said she lied the very first day when they asked about her family. She told them her father had been a respected figure who lived an admirable life and had passed on, leaving behind a legacy she claimed she was proud to follow. The lie did not stop there. It grew each time she walked into those rooms. It spread because lies do not stay small once they find space to live. She added story after story until the truth was buried under all the versions she created. The farther she walked into that new world, the farther she drifted from the world she came from. She told me she never intended to hold a farewell event, but that her group insisted on honoring the father they believed had shaped her life. She said she felt trapped, that she could not say no without tearing down the story she had built. She said she invited me only because she was sure I would not come, and that she could continue her act without consequence. Hearing that broke something deep inside me. I thought about every meal I cooked for her, every morning I woke before sunrise to earn enough so she never felt unsafe, every night I sat with her after a bad day at school, every moment I sacrificed pieces of myself so she could grow strong. I was not perfect, but I was present and real and steady. And she erased me not because I hurt her, but because she felt embarrassed of the man who raised her with honest hands instead of wealthy ones. I asked her plain and simple if she ever truly loved me. She did not answer. Her tears fell, but words did not come, and that silence hit harder than any confession she could have given. It felt like the final truth slipping quietly out into the open. She had lost sight of who she was, and in the process, she had cut away the one person who had stood beside her since the day she was born. Something shifted inside me in that moment, not rage, not the sharp sting of heartbreak. It was a calm strength that rose from deep within like a tide moving in slow and steady. I realized I could not force her to respect me. I could not make her value honesty. I could not shape her heart to hold gratitude, but I could reclaim my own dignity. I could show her that a father is not something you can bury with lies while he still walks on his own 2 feet. So I turned away from her, without raising my voice, without pleading for answers, and without giving her the comfort of knowing I would bend to the hurt she caused. I walked home with a steady pace and a clear mind, ready to take back the parts of myself I had given away for far too long. I sat alone in my living room that night, the same room where I had once read bedtime stories to a little girl who insisted on holding my hand until she fell asleep. It felt smaller than usual, as if the walls themselves were pulling closer, listening to the storm that was building quietly inside me. I didn't pace, I didn't shout, I didn't break anything. I simply sat there in that old armchair, the one she used to climb onto as a child, curling against my side, while asking innocent questions about life and dreams and the future. Funny how life changes. Funny how a child who once couldn't sleep without hearing my voice now found it convenient to pretend I didn't exist at all. I replayed everything over and over again in my mind, each memory a wave brushing against a shoreline that had begun to crumble. I thought of the mornings I woke up before sunrise just to make her breakfast before school. I thought of the nights I skipped dinner so she could have a full plate. I thought of the times I carried her on my shoulders when her legs got tired, even on days when my own back felt like it was made of glass. I remembered the laughter, the small hands tugging at my shirt, the way she clung to me whenever thunder rolled through the town. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my purpose, my reason, the one thing in the world I believed I had done right. And yet for her, that wasn't enough. For her, the man who raised her wasn't shiny enough, not polished, not impressive, not rich, not the kind of father she wanted people to imagine when they judged her worth. So she arosed me. Not with violence, not with hate, but with lies, quiet, elegant lies spoken in air-conditioned rooms filled with people who believed themselves too important to question anything. Lies that painted me as a man who once lived, and then didn't. Lies that turned me into a story, a symbol, a convenient tragedy she could use as a stepping stone. I sat in that armchair until the moon was high, the clock ticking like a heartbeat in the silence, and I asked myself the same question over and over. How does a child reach a point where they pretend their father is dead? Was it pride? Was it shame? Was it the hunger to belong somewhere she thought was above her upbringing? Or was it something deeper, a quiet resentment I never saw growing? Whatever the reason, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I would not fight her with rage. I would not claw at her reputation or scream about betrayal. I would not treat her like an enemy, even if she acted like one. My revenge didn't need to be vicious. It didn't need to be grand. It didn't need to be the kind that destroys lives. My revenge would be truth. Truth is a quiet weapon, but in the right moment, it cuts deeper than fury ever could. The next day, after a long night of thinking, after a morning of staring at my reflection and realizing I didn't recognize the pain in my own eyes, I put on a clean shirt, combed my hair, and walked out of the house with a calmness that came from somewhere deeper than anger. A calm that felt like stone, like something unbreakable. I went back to that same group, the elite circle she had worked so hard to impress, the place where she performed her new life, the same people who had bowed their heads in fake sympathy for a death that never happened. When I entered, they all turned. Their surprise was almost theatrical, hands flying to mouths, eyes widening, a few people stepping backward, as if my presence broke the rules of nature. I asked to speak with the main organizer, a man who carried himself like he had never made a mistake in his life. He led me into a quiet room. And then I told the truth. Not a dramatic version, not an embellished version, just the raw, bare truth of a father who raised his daughter with everything he had. I told him about my life, my work, the sacrifices, the simple home I kept, the love I poured into a child who grew up believing she needed something shinier to be accepted. I spoke with no anger in my voice, only a kind of sad steadiness that made every word feel heavier. He listened, truly listened. And the more I spoke, the more I saw the disappointment flicker across his face, not at me, but at her. He wasn't the only one I spoke to. I spoke to a handful of people who had attended the event, individuals who had believed deeply in the beautiful, elegant version of her story. They listened to me with quiet shock. Some apologized. Some asked if I needed help. One woman gently placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You didn't deserve this." Others said they would support me if things turned cruel or if she tried to twist the story again. I didn't want to ruin her. I didn't want to drag her through the mud. I didn't want to see her fall apart. That wasn't the goal. I simply wanted the truth to stand in the open without hiding. I wanted her to face the reality she had tried so desperately to bury. And the truth, once spoken, doesn't stay contained. It travels. It spreads. It reaches ears she never intended to let near the truth. Soon the people she had impressed with her lies began to question everything she told them. Soon they began to murmur behind her back, wondering who she really was. Soon she would walk into her new world and feel the shift in the air. People would look at her differently, not with admiration, but with curiosity, confusion, and a quiet sense of betrayal. And when that happened, she would have no one to blame but herself. Truth is small, calm, soft-spoken. But it echoes longer than any lie. And I knew that echo was coming for her. The truth moves differently than lies. Lies sprint, fast, desperate, frantic, always looking over their shoulders. But truth walks. Slow, patient, steady. It doesn't rush. It doesn't hide. It simply moves forward until it arrives exactly where it needs to be, and when it does, it stands there with a weight that cannot be ignored. Within a week, that quiet, patient truth had woven itself through every corner of the business circle my daughter wanted so badly to impress. It drifted through their meetings, slipped into their private lounges, surfaced in their whispered side conversations. It reached the very people she had tried to charm with her curated elegance and her polished stories. It reached the ones who had once nodded in approval every time she spoke about her late father, the man she painted as a perfect figure who could no longer contradict her. And when they heard the real story, not a dramatic version, not a bitter version, just the bare, unvarnished truth, they reacted in ways she never prepared for. People who had praised her so confidently now sat in groups, their voices low, their brows furrowed. Some felt betrayed, deeply and personally, as if her lie had used them as props. Some felt embarrassed for mourning a man they never met, for offering condolences over a death that never occurred. Others felt angry, angrier than even I had expected, because she had exploited their trust, their sympathy, and their reputation for her own advancement. They didn't blame me. They didn't mock my simple life. They didn't look down on the father she was ashamed of. They blamed her. They questioned her. They wondered what else she was capable of lying about. And I stayed silent. I didn't add fuel to the fire. I didn't paint myself as a victim. I didn't spit venom or talk about the wound she left in my chest. I didn't stand in front of anyone demanding justice or pointing fingers. All I did was tell the truth when they asked. And the truth, steady and unhurried, did the rest. A week after the event, on an evening dipped in a soft orange light, I heard a knock at my door. A gentle knock, not the hurried kind of someone angry or panicked, but the hesitant kind of someone who doesn't know what they want to say or if they deserve to say anything at all. When I opened the door, Lauren stood there. She looked different, smaller. Not physically, she was still my daughter, the woman who had grown into an adult life far beyond the one I had imagined. But emotionally, spiritually, she looked reduced, like all the air had been let out of the image she had worked so hard to inflate. Her shoulders slumped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, as if she was holding on to herself, because everything else had slipped away. Her voice trembled before she even spoke. "Dad, why did you tell everyone? Not how are you? Not can we talk? Not even I'm sorry. Just that one question, heavy with frustration and fear." I stepped aside and let her inside, not out of obligation, but out of instinct. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the room she grew up in, the room she had once filled with laughter, arguments, birthday balloons, school projects. The room she abandoned when she went searching for a life that didn't include me. She didn't sit. She just stood there, trying to gather herself, trying to understand a world that was finally reacting to her choices. I answered with the same calm that had carried me through the entire ordeal. I told them because it was my name they buried, my life, my truth. I had a right to reclaim who I am. I had a right to exist, Lauren. You do not get to erase me just because a lie feels easier to live with. She flinched, not dramatically, but in a way that told me the words hit deeper than she expected. Her chin quivered, her eyes filled, not with the sharp defensiveness she often carried, but with something softer, heavier, more fragile. She broke down, not the loud, raging kind of breakdown, not the dramatic, attention-seeking collapse of someone performing sorrow, but a quiet, exhausted breaking, the kind that comes when a person realizes they are finally standing in the ruins they built with their own hands. She told me her career was falling apart. Her voice cracked when she said the business circle had removed her from positions she fought for. She said meetings were awkward now, that whispers followed her in hallways, that her business partner, the one she trusted the most, looked at her with suspicion instead of confidence. She asked me to fix it. Help me, she said, say something, explain something, make them trust me again. For a moment, a very small moment, I saw the little girl again, the child who once ran to me when her world felt scary, when she skinned her knee, when she dropped her favorite toy. But that moment passed quickly. I told her the truth. I am not the one who broke it. You broke it, Lauren, with your choices, with your lies. I didn't ruin your world. You did that all by yourself. She looked at me then, really looked, without pride, without defensiveness, without the polished mask she wore around others. She looked at me like a child who finally understood that actions have weight and that some mistakes don't crumble instantly but fall apart slowly, piece by piece, until the entire structure collapses. But even then, even standing there with tears in her eyes and guilt sitting heavy on her shoulders, she didn't apologize. Not yet. The words hovered somewhere inside her, trapped behind pride, behind shame, behind the stubbornness she inherited from me perhaps, but twisted in ways I never intended. In the end, she didn't say anything. She simply turned and walked toward the door. Her steps were slow, her silence thick, her breathing shaky. She paused for a moment before opening the door, as if waiting for me to stop her, to comfort her, to rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. But I stayed quiet. And she left the same way she arrived, silent, torn, drowning in the truth she could no longer outrun. Weeks slipped by in a quiet, steady rhythm, the way time moves when a storm has passed, but the world is still damp, still settling, still remembering the force of what hit it. I didn't chase after Lauren, I didn't call her, I didn't check in with anyone from her business circle. I simply let life breathe again. I took my morning walks down the same soft gravel path behind my house, the one lined with old maple trees that had watched me age. I talked to a few friends, shared simple meals, watered the plants she once bought for me on a random Sunday years ago. I didn't avoid thinking about her, but I didn't drown in it either. I let the ache sit where it wanted. I let the anger dissolve slowly, the way ice melts, not with fire, not with fury, but because time says it must. And in that stillness, I realized something. Real healing doesn't chase the person who caused the wound. It waits for them to face what they've done. It waits for them to walk back on their own feet. And she did. It was a quiet afternoon when I heard the knock. The same soft knock from before, but different somehow, less hesitant, more humbled, almost trembling. When I opened the door, Lauren stood there, but not the Lauren who had walked into fancy rooms with polished confidence and rehearsed smiles. This was a bare version of her, stripped of pretenses, stripped of that desperate need to impress, stripped of the armor she wore around others. Her hair wasn't styled, her eyes were swollen, her shoulders were not pulled back the way she always trained herself to stand in her new world. She looked like someone who had been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, almost reverently, like she was entering a place she once knew but had forgotten how to belong to. She sat on the old couch, the same couch she used to jump on with muddy shoes when she was 5, the couch that held memories she tried to outrun. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She stared at her hands, twisting her fingers the way she used to when she was nervous about school tests or telling me about a bad grade. I sat across from her, waiting, not impatiently, not coldly, but with the quiet acceptance of a father who had lived long enough to know that truth arrives only when it is ready. And then she spoke. Not rushed, not defensive, not rehearsed. Her words came out raw, heavy, trembling. She told me everything, every fear, every insecurity, every cruel whisper she had heard in that shiny world she tried to belong to. She told me how out of place she felt among people who valued wealth more than heart, image more than honesty. She told me how she thought she needed to create a story that made her seem worthy, made her seem impressive, made her seem like she came from something greater than simplicity. She told me she lied because she was ashamed of being average, ashamed of being normal, ashamed of being herself. And in that twisted fear, she erased the one man who had always stood behind her without asking for anything in return. Her voice cracked when she told me that the guilt hit her every morning, that she woke up feeling like she had betrayed something sacred, that she couldn't look in the mirror without feeling like a stranger stared back. She told me she felt lonely, empty, exposed. She told me pride had kept her from speaking sooner. She told me losing her credibility, her reputation, her circle, none of that hurt as much as knowing she had lost me. And then, finally, the moment came. The moment I didn't expect, the moment I thought might never arrive, the moment that softened something inside me like rain softens dry earth. She took a shaking breath, covered her face with her hands, and whispered through tears, "Dad, I'm sorry." The words weren't perfect, they weren't poetic, they weren't rehearsed, they were simply true, and that truth, those 3 small words, hit harder than any applause she ever chased. She cried not politely, not prettily, but the way people cry when the truth has finally broken the dams they've built inside themselves. Her shoulders shook, her voice cracked. Tears spilled through her fingers and dropped onto the couch she once stained with juice boxes and paint. She wept like the child she once was, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and tangled hair, asking me to fix little hurts that felt big to her. And as I watched her, something inside my chest loosened, a weight I had been carrying quietly, tightly, stubbornly. It didn't vanish. It didn't magically heal everything, but it moved, it shifted, it finally breathed. I told her forgiveness wasn't something you snap your fingers to create. It's a bridge, not a door. You walk it slowly. You rebuild it plank by plank. She nodded, not defeated, but understanding for the first time. There was no shouting, no dramatic explosion, no grand speeches, just honesty, raw, painful, necessary honesty. It was the first real moment between us in years. The first moment without lies, without pride, without distance. A moment where the hurt was fully exposed, but so was the love beneath it. A moment where a father and a daughter finally stood in the same truth. A moment that didn't fix everything, but finally began to. Time moved the way old rivers move after a storm. Not fast, not loud, just steady, slow, and honest. Nothing was fixed overnight. Nothing snapped back into place like it used to be when Lauren was small, and her biggest worry was whether she could stay up past her bedtime. But something real began to grow again, something we had lost long before the day she tried to erase me. She started coming around more often, not with the stiff politeness she wore when she wanted something, and not with the hurried tone she used when she was rushing off to shine in someone else's world. She came because she wanted to sit with me, because she finally wanted to know me again. She washed dishes beside me. She helped sweep the porch. She made dinner with me, bumping into me in the kitchen the way she used to when she was too small to reach the counter. We talked about simple things first, like weather and old memories, then deeper things like her fears, the pressure she put on herself, the way she let others shape who she thought she had to be. I listened, not as a judge, not as a wounded man, but as her father, the same man who once held her tiny hand crossing the street. I did not rush forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a switch. It is a slow rebuilding, a bridge made of trust, laid plank by steady hands, and she understood that. She showed up. She put in the time. She apologized again, not out of guilt anymore, but out of genuine understanding. She found new work, much simpler than the world she had chased before. A smaller office, a smaller salary, a smaller spotlight, but for the first time in years she looked calm. Her voice carried no tension when she talked about her day. She told her new co-workers the truth about her past, about her mistakes, about me, and to her surprise, they respected her more for it. People trust honesty in a way they never trust polish. One evening she sat across from me at the dinner table with a smile I had not seen since she was a kid. She said, "Dad, I feel like I can breathe again." Not because everything outside her had changed, but because she had changed inside. She had stopped chasing people who valued money more than heart. She had stopped shaping herself to impress folks who barely cared whether she slept at night. She had returned to the world she once tried to escape, but this time with both feet on the ground. As for me, I learned something I never thought I would learn this late in my life. A parent can give everything and still face heartbreak. You can break your back to raise a child right and still watch them lose themselves. You can pour love into someone until your cup is empty and still find yourself standing alone in a room where everyone believes you are gone. But strength does not come from shouting. It does not come from anger or revenge made of fire. Real strength comes from standing in the truth, from holding your head high even when someone you love tries to bury your name, from choosing dignity over rage, from letting the truth shine brighter than any lie ever could. The day I walked into that hall and saw my own farewell picture shining under those bright lights, I thought my life had taken its cruelest turn. I thought I had lost my daughter forever. I thought the world had turned upside down in a way that could never be put back. But now I see it differently. That day was the beginning of something new, something painful, yes, but necessary. A new chapter where I finally stood up for myself, where I reclaimed the right to exist, where my daughter finally learned what honor looks like. Not the kind printed on invitations or displayed in fancy rooms, but the kind that sits quietly in the heart, steady and unshaken. And the lesson is simple but heavy. Never erase the people who built you. Never lie about the hands that carried you. Never bury the truth for the sake of pride. Because truth always rises. It rises through silence, through fear, through shame, through time. And when it does, those who tried to bury it will stand face to face with the weight of their own choices. Lauren learned that. I learned something too. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward with open eyes and a steady mind. Our story is not perfect. It will never be polished, but it is honest now. And sometimes honesty is the most powerful ending a story can have.